Bristow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This country has allowed and tolerated protest for centuries. I'm not convinced that many protests achieve anything much beyond noise, but we are a democracy. Freedom of speech in our media should be matched by the freedom to express those views in... Of course I will.
The honourable gentleman has said that he is not aware that protests have actually done anything worthwhile. What about the protests of the Chartists? What about the protests of suffragettes? What about protests calling for peace? Does he really think that those historic protests achieve nothing?
The right honourable lady is a long-standing member of this House and has enormous respect by me and by many people in this House. But I would just respectfully point out that is not what I said. What I said was that I'm not convinced that many protests achieve anything much. There are notable examples where protests have achieved a great deal. But I'm not convinced, Madam Deputy Speaker, that many of the protests we see each and every day now are achieving anything at all. That's my point. Freedom of speech in our media should be matched by the freedom to express those views, and I agree with the right honourable friend, the right honourable member for Hackney and Stoke Newington, because protest is important. That's the point I was trying to make. That was the point exactly I was trying to make. Because whether it achieves anything or not, that's besides the point. Because the fact that so much of it comes from political perspectives that are opposed to mine is also beside the point. Anyone tempted down that route just needs to look around the world. The scenes in Russia of protesters with blank signs being arrested are a reminder that what we could stand to lose is nothing less than freedom itself. So I will always defend legitimate protest by those with whom I disagree. However, there are also illegitimate ways of protesting, ways that go beyond the expression of a view to impositions on the freedoms of others and the violations of our laws, and to acts which can even pose a risk to people's lives. Direct action is not a legitimate form of protest. Locking on, which is defined in Clause 1 of the bill, is not a legitimate form of protest. Obstruction of major transport works, which is defined in Clause 3 of the bill, is not a legitimate form of protest. Of course.
What seems to me the Honourable Friend is distinguishing is peaceful protest, of which there is a long tradition, as he's rightly said, and violent protest. And these acts are violent acts. The destruction of property, the attacks on individuals, not just the inconvenience, but the nuisance, the real damage caused, life-threatening damage caused when roads are blocked. These are acts of violence. They are militant and extreme, and they can be distinguished from peaceful, legitimate protest.
Bristow.
My right honourable friend, as always, is absolutely correct when it comes to this point. Because interference with key national infrastructure, as set out in Clause 4 and 5, is not legitimate protest. Of course I'll give it.
There's an inconsistency here which is just breathtaking. His honourable friend from Ashfield has just described how he stood on a picket line during the miners' strike. Picket lines designed to stop scab workers going into somebody else's colliery in many instances. That is direct action, not indirect action, but direct action. Is he saying all of the people on picket lines should have been arrested? Is that really what he's saying?
If my honourable friend wants to relive the battles of the 1980s, if my honourable member wishes to turn around and say that preventing legitimate people wanting to earn a living, provide for their families and earn money is illegitimate, or is wrong, then I'm quite happy to be on the other side of the debate from the honourable member.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. I noticed the honourable gentleman opposite described people who went to work during the strike as a scab. I'm sure that my honourable friend would agree with me. That's disgraceful language. He should take it back, and quite frankly, he should be ashamed of himself.
or that's a point which I agree with wholeheartedly. But let's get back to the substance of this debate, because I'm very proud, I'm very pleased to stand on a record and stand perhaps at the next general election on a record of having this bill passed, because I said during the Queen's speech that the people of Peterborough are hugely supportive of measures taken against those who would glue themselves to roads, who would disrupt ambulances, and who would stop hard-working people going about their ordinary business. Because in that, they are no different to a large majority of people across this country. Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, Just Stop Oil, and the rest of these extreme groups, and I use that word carefully because they are extreme groups, are opposed to the democratic process and against the democratic majority. And the only reason that we've heard howls from the opposition benches is because those members likewise disagree with the view of the majority. It's because they sympathise with serious disruption when it suits their own political causes. And it's because they apply the rule of law to the government but fail to apply it to a mob. We have a duty to protect the public from the irresponsible, selfish and dangerous behaviour of extremists. Serious disruption prevention orders are a sensible and proportionate response. Otherwise, we will continue to see repeat offences by those who place their own opinions above the rights, the health and the livelihood of others. Our courts need these powers to uphold the integrity of the law. Our society needs these measures to uphold our civil and civic values. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, should be thanked for bringing this bill forward by every democratically elected member of this House. In bringing some of these measures, blocked in the other place by the unelected members of this Parliament, she's doing democracy's work. And if I may, I want to tell the House a story about Sahana, a constituent of mine. I've changed her name. I mean, this is interesting for the honourable members opposite to actually listen to, because she's changed her name. She's changed her name because she doesn't want her name told mentioned in the House of Commons, in fear that she would be targeted for repercussions. So I've changed her name because Sahana is a nurse. And for a while, she was living with her sister somewhere else, but at the same time was working at Watford General Hospital. And one morning, while she was driving to work, she encountered traffic jams tailing back miles and miles, while protesters, public nuisances, blocked the road, blocked the M25 at junction 23 for South Mims. She was monstrously late for work, as were many of her colleagues. And as a result, many kind of shifts were seriously on demand. A clinic was cancelled. It didn't go ahead, and patients suffered. They did not get the NHS treatment that they deserved. What is the justification for this?
None.
Members opposite who somehow support measures like this, protests like this, need to seriously look themselves in the mirror. At the very least, they should get on board with this legislation that will address these, and I don't even want to call them protests, because they're not protests, these irritants, these nuisances that have serious consequences for hard-working people, and of course access to public services. So I just want to end with just one really legitimate point. When I talk about illegitimate processes, I'm not talking about the passionate people who in my constituency protested against about certain things that occurred to the Windrush generation. I'm not talking about those quite nice Extinction Rebellion protests, even the local Peterborough people who my office fed tea to when they protested outside my office. These people weren't blocking the highway. These people weren't gluing themselves to public infrastructure. They weren't locking in. They weren't causing serious disruption. That form of protest is what we're all here to defend. But what we're not here to defend, Madam Deputy Speaker, are people who go beyond that, go beyond legitimate protest. But I'll always stand up for those who do organise legitimate protests, even though I disagree with them.
Kate Osamore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, we face a multitude of crises